It was the green rush in some ways in regenerative finance. I think we were all super excited and we could all kind of paper over all the little things that didn't quite make sense. We didn't quite know how they work. We didn't quite actually understand what that person was saying, but it was all good vibes.
Hi, ReFi Podcast. I'm back with a special episode of Regeneration Nexus. Today, I sat down with Dave Fortson, Chief Growth Officer of Regen Network, and Sandra Ponce de Leon, co-founder of ReFi Tulum and the owner of the NFT boutique. We took a step back to look at the big picture, where the Regen space is heading as we move from the early energy of green rush into the new phase of grounded realism. We discussed how do we make space for creative experimentation while staying realistic about the need for a sustainable business model? What does it really mean to build regenerative commons, and why is a shared framework so important? We also talked about the realities of community building and what it takes to establish trust with your customers. So what's your take? Leave a comment and share the episode with your community. Hi, Sandra and Dave. Welcome to the ReFi Podcast.
Thank you. Hey, Maya. It's great to see you. And hey, Dave.
Hi, greetings, everyone. Thanks for having me. And it's nice to connect in with both of you. I know Maya, I've known you for quite some time, or relative to this recent world of regenerative finance. And Sandra, I've heard about you plenty. So it'd be fun to get to know you a little bit better. And thanks, both of you, for all your work.
Yes, it's about time to have both of you on the podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you in this special edition of the episode that kind of emerged out of our discussion with you, Dave, about sort of the trends we're seeing, where the space is headed. And I'm really excited to chat with you too, specifically because you've been in this space for a while. And for those who don't know, Dave is a Chief Growth Officer at Regen Network, and Sandra is the co-founder of ReFi Tulum, also the owner of the NFT boutique in Tulum. And I've had the pleasure to meet both of you in person. So this episode is all about sort of the big picture of where the Regen space is headed. It's meant to offer real takes for the community. I really want to touch on what's working, what's not working in the Regen space, the trends that you're seeing, and maybe some of the advice that you can give to the community as we wrap up season 4 of the ReFi podcast. So let's dive in and start with what got you into the Regen space in the first place. I'm really curious, what was the moment for both of you when you realized that you want to dedicate your time to this movement? Dave, do you want to start?
Yeah, happy to. I think, what started actually years ago, and I'll fast forward very quickly, but was a theology of nature class I took when I was 16 years old. I was at a Jesuit high school, and some bulb clicked for me around that I wanted to make my life and career based on environmentalism at that time, and now in an iteration of that, a regenerative finance. But in more recent times, what really turned me onto it was this ongoing search that I had after being in activism as a community organizer. I was in politics, I was in technology, I was in marketing, all related to ecology in one form or another, and just ecological repair or permaculture. At one point, I was on land on 300 acres with my family, bringing back an old cattle ranch with regenerative agriculture and holistic rangeland management, things like that. And I still kept bumping up into just consistently that as long as we're primarily at the global economic system is dominated by some version of capitalism, which has frankly been bastardized so horribly, right? That where we've externalized the fundamental system that underpins all of our day-to-day activities, right? Which is a natural, healthy, high-functioning ecosystem. We put that on the outside and we decided to build a whole financial model that essentially was based on the extraction of the value within those ecosystem services. And that until we could figure out how to make legible ecological health in order to bring it into our day-to-day interactions with each other and with how we spend money and how we make policy, how we do public planning, that we were going to be in deep trouble. And so for all the activism and all the work that I was doing in, education, policy, all these things, until we made legible ecological health and helped connect it to our day-to-day interactions, that we were going to be in trouble. So when ReFi or regenerative finance popped up through Regen Network, one of the OGs in the space, that was when I really realized like I'd found my home. And so anyhow, here I am today, it's 2025, still at it through the highs and lows, but that's a little bit of my origin story.
Nice. And we'll definitely touch on those highs and lows later. But before that, Sandra, what's your story with the ReFi space?
My story is taking a sailing trip through the Windward Islands in 2017. And it was a love story that didn't ever end up being. It ended in heartbreak. But along the way on that trip, we visited many different islands from starting at Martinique all the way to Grenada. And as we were traveling through those islands, one of the things that just kept popping up were these dead coral, like everywhere, white skeleton, brown, and even, places where like the conch shells would just be like, stacked up because they were just overfishing them and that's what they eat. So, through that trip, I kind of turned my heartbreak and pushed that all into the ocean, reconnected with my love for the ocean, and decided after many years of marketing and technology and startups and being a co-founder that I really wanted to focus my skills, my network, my experience on leaving the planet a better place. And really primarily my why is for my nieces who I adore, and for my nephews, and for, all the kids in my family that I really wanted them to experience the ocean the way that I've seen it, and not an ocean as is predicted in 2050 that's going to be filled with plastic. And so, from that point, I really focused my efforts on ocean work. I started the Blue Economy Agency, and it was also around that time, Blue Economy Agency, which is a marketing agency focused on ocean technologies for good. And really my focus became on technology for good, although I had a lot of that focus before. And then that was also right around the time of the 2017 ICO boom. And that's really where I got my first start, working for a company that was building floating islands that were supposed to be sustainable, self-sustaining, regenerative. And that's really where I got the bulk of my knowledge about ocean regeneration and the regenerative field in general. And I didn't stay in the ICO or in the crypto space. I got out of it. I was just focused on pure ocean technologies. And then 4 years ago, moving to Tulum, I connected with my ocean tribe here that were already very involved in building Web3 infrastructure for tokenization of real world assets, of technologies that can restore ecosystems and transform plastic into fuel. So that's really my journey. And for the last 4 years, yes, as you mentioned, I've been here with the NFT boutique in Tulum, which really is a showcase to what's possible in this world when we all come together, the beauty of Web3 and being that showcase of what's possible to the world. And then, yes, also with ReFi Tulum really being an on the ground action force for positive change for the planet.
I love this. Thanks for sharing your why and connecting with your personal motivations, because I think that's a good reminder for why people are doing what they're doing. And shout out to the NFT boutique. It was really cool to visit it when I was in Tulum last year. And now I would say in the world of all this digital work, it's cool to actually have a physical space where you can go. So if you're ever in Tulum, highly recommend checking it out. And you both are involved in technology for good and in marketing. I also do some work in marketing. And as you know, messaging is really important to spread the ideas across and, build coalitions and recruit more people and things like that. And what I find is that in this, regen, refi space, the messaging and the wording, some jargon can be too much, because we are talking about Web3, which is its own beast. Then we're talking about environmentalism, climate science, climate finance. That's already also quite a hefty industry in and of itself. So combining the two, right, and communicating that to people completely outside of these spaces has been a big challenge for me. So what I'm curious for both of you to answer is, how do you describe what you do to your grandma or someone completely outside of the Web3 space, of the Regen space? If you were to meet, or let's say someone on the street and they ask you, okay, so what do you do in your career? How do you convey that message?
I would say we are encouraging people to do good work for the planet and compensating them for their time. So that's one aspect of what we do. And I would say also it's a way for us, for me personally, my community, to take control of really what matters to us and to come together as a community and to leverage the power of this global network to be able to raise the funds that we need to be able to implement those public goods for our community.
Fair. For me, I guess there's two answers. One for Regen Network Development, PBC, Public Benefit Corporation. That's the corporation that I work for and have been part of for quite some time. I say that we are a software company that has developed a platform for the origination and management of ecological assets. And then as far as, kind of what does that mean? That we help people get paid for verified ecological impact, right? So something somewhat similar, but the idea that if people improve the planet, that they should get paid and it should be verified.
Nice, nice. I like having these descriptions that don't mention anything about Web3 or the scary words of decentralized technology. But then if you want to dig into it, and I guess we'll get to that in a second of like why Web3. But, you shared your story of how you got into the regen space, and both of you have been involved in it for quite some time. So you've kind of seen a lot of waves and, rises and falls of the community. So I wonder, can you provide a personal take of like what some of the trends you're seeing and what are some of your predictions on where the space is going?
Yeah, I'm happy I've got some thoughts here. Sometimes I feel a little on the older side in this space, for better, for worse. I think what the perspective it's given me, let's say, I was in the heat of the 2020 to 2022 excitement around altcoins and all of the ReFi explosion, where frankly, anything that you do sounded great. Everyone had a new protocol or a new chain they were spinning up, or a new project, a new way of being paid for doing good work. It was very exciting. Then reality smacked us all around super hard, right? I mean, the crypto economy crashed, the carbon markets crashed. And I think, just the long tail of all of the excitement and heat of a bunch of dreamers getting together with this new technology and being able just on an idea and good vibes, be able to spin up a concept, just, ran into the realities of did you build something that people use? Did you gain any traction? Do you know who your target market is? Do you know how you're going to run a successful business? And I'd say for good 8 out of 10, maybe 9, the answer was not very good for all of those questions. And it wasn't because there was no malintent. I think, this was just it was the green rush in some ways in regenerative finance. I think we were all super excited and we could all kind of paper over all the little things that didn't quite make sense. We didn't quite know how they work. We didn't quite actually understand what that person was saying, but it was all good vibes. And while, to some degree, some of the older organizations like us, Regen Network, who's been building for a long time, we'd see all these things popping up, be like, yay, cheer. We added, money to grants and things like that. And, and we were still trying to jam, and sometimes we were included. Sometimes we felt we weren't. And, some of it was self-inflicted pain that we put on ourselves. But, I think, as we fast forward to today, I think that we're seeing the effects of lack of discipline and seriousness around the development of products that can gain traction, and that, people who are dedicated to running a sustainable business, it's been a really difficult space. And frankly, until you go through the hell of seeing your business crash and seeing your markets crash and, having the hard conversations with people of why aren't we partnering better? And why aren't you using my product? Why am I not using yours? All of that is perfect display in some ways right now. And my guess is where we're headed, to cut to the chase, is probably a necessary effort to specialize, for different protocols and groups and entities to specialize a little bit into what they do best, to abstract away as much of Web3 as possible so that people have a Web2 interface for interacting with our products, period. That we have a business model that actually builds a sustainable business, or you can tell a damn good story to your investors around your plan for growth, and that you are the right people to do it. And really partnerships that are not performative and are based in, frankly, rolling up the sleeves and doing the hard work, and everyone kind of setting aside their sacred things that they thought that they needed to be doing, or that they have their own this or their own that, and folding in a little bit to each other, again, around probably complementary specialties, and around, I think complementary dedication to just doing the hard work of product development and design. and really showing legitimate traction in far beyond the Web3 space. With all due respect to the ReFi community, we're small. We're small and we don't have a lot of money. And we're the necessary builders right now. And our failures are going to become foundational for future entrepreneurs and organizations that will have seen and built upon the base code that we created, or the base ideas, or the base relationships, or the base events that we put on, that even if if I went away, I feel like I've helped build some really solid blocks or been participant in doing that will help the next wave of entrepreneurs. And that is something that some of us can be like, wow, that was my contribution. And only probably a handful of us that are listening to this right now will actually be able to, frankly, have the durability and resilience and the luck to make it to this next wave of businesses that are designed to scale. And those are, I think, some of the hard realities. And then not to be cynical, but just again, I just turned 50. Happy birthday to me. I just turned 50. And those are just the realities of just running business. Most fail. And failure really, in some ways, we need a little bit more of a internal postmortems and retros around, what did we do these past couple of years that just worked incredibly well? Like when we were really firing, what was true? And then what did we ignore? And what aren't we doing still? Or what are the obstacles or blockers that really allow regenerative finance to act and be a lot bigger than it is? Because even as you're thinking about, right now, real world assets is kind of like a buzzy term, right? I mean, we're all in the real world asset business. But when you talk to the DGen real world asset people, they're looking at us like, you're not real world assets. You're not that interesting, because you're not going to make me a bunch of money, and we've got to be in that fine line of holding to principles and also being able to tell a good story of people can make money, run great businesses, have verified impact, and we can scale to millions of people. Those kinds of things all need to be things that we can say to ourselves and design around every single day. So I think there's a little bit of we've got some scarring now. We've got a little reality check. We've got some really interesting components that are still here and appear to be durable. And we've got some in Web3 technology. When it comes to a Web2 interfaces are becoming much better and easier. And there's also the barriers between blockchains even are starting to lower as it becomes more Web3, becomes flatter and less siloed. So I think there's going to be a lot of really neat collaborations and partnerships and just easier to do those things in the very near future compared to, a few years back when we were, it didn't really matter, right? We were just young and, precocious and excited and we were just doing our thing. And now it's okay, roll up the sleeves, shake off all the dust from just getting beat up for a little bit. And now let's go forward, but let's be serious and disciplined and help each other out and know that an incremental, steady improvement is the name of the game.
Well said, and happy birthday. Thanks for
Thank you.
providing your wisdom to the community. That's exactly why I really wanted to have this episode to talk about the realities of building a business versus the aspirational kind of ideological visions that the community has. And Sandra, what's your take on where the Regen space is headed?
Well, I mean, I think we just need to be easy on ourselves because we are still babies, in the big scheme of things, we don't have the maturity of the established financial institutions, and DGen space and the DeFi space has, because of that money has definitely accelerated and evolved to, a much, in terms of volume and transactions, a much bigger place than where we are in ReFi. But I guess I just tend to look at it like we're still early and we are still learning those lessons and integrating those lessons. And yeah, it has been this big experiment of how do you DAO, right? How do you do this? And, as with a lot of people that are in multiple projects or are still trying to maintain a day job. So, I think that we're going through, all the standard growing pains of what entrepreneurship is about, which is, how do you make it work while you're still, funding yourself? Are you paying yourself? All of these things are, I think that just as the idealists that we are, maybe we don't think about those things. We just want to put everything into the cause. And so, yeah, I think that now is really the time for that maturity to take shape and for us to, integrate the more well-known, startup models. I mean, I think seeing things like A16 and some of the more traditional incubators from Silicon Valley and their involvement in the space, some of the things that are happening on the agent side with I think that's very exciting. I think that, it really has come into the world now at a place where it's so perfect for us as ReFi founders, which we're trying to do so much, or founders in general, be able to, really have or act as teams. But now we have this help with AI. So I think that we're going to see those support systems that we build around ourselves with AI are just going to be able to, help us accelerate that much faster, where we can be that 2-person, that 5-person team that gets things done. And yeah, I do think that, the things that I see taking shape and us all taking a lot more seriously are things like metrics, impact tracking, and, making sure that we've got, from, one activity to another, that we are, getting all those impact metrics proven, put on the blockchain and put into perpetuity for the future, so that other people can learn from these footprints that we're building now, from these templates that we're building now. So I think it's really, we've been in the building space and creating these templates. I see a lot of these templates actually happening like in the Regen coordination space with ReFi DAO, which has done so much, has helped us with ReFi Tulum, just having these organizational guides for new founders, for people that are operating at a local level. How do they implement these things? What are the things that we can do to strengthen our own organizations in terms of how do we, go out to government partnerships or, potentially, corporate sponsorships, things of that nature. I see more and more of that interest coming in. So I'm very optimistic for the space. I guess that just is part of my idealistic DNA. But, I just see that we just need to be patient while still accelerating everything. And yeah, being more collaborative and taking those lessons from each other that will help us get to the next level.
Thanks for offering the optimistic take on this. From what I'm hearing, as we really need to focus on building sustainable business models. And, as exciting as AI is and all these tech developments, technology on its own is not going to create those sustainable businesses, right? And to the point, Dave, that you were saying, how do we connect impact and make it profitable while scaling? Other examples of this actually working, like how do we build those sustainable business models? And the second thing that I'm seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is for the space to scale and become sustainable and continue growing and attracting more and more people, we need to build partnerships and legit partnerships, right? Not, like you said, performative partnerships. So how do we do that?
Well, I think I guess there's a couple of things, and Sandra mentioned it, and I think it's still worth, like, there are a bunch of age-old practices, in traditional business that are just worth revisiting, I think, for our community as a whole, of just a discipline around, use a lean canvas or use any XYZ business development frameworks off the shelf to really help you ask questions of yourself of, who are you building for? What's their pain point? What's the target market? What's your total available market? Who are your competitors right now? What are they offering? Have you talked to any of, the customers of those competitors? Can you provide something better? Like, there's just, and again, I assume there's a fair amount of us who have done some version of that or the other, but we still end up falling, I think, maybe in this early phase, again, of experimentation, because I think that's on point. We've been in a deeply experimental phase, and which has been exciting, but I think we're in a realism phase now. This is where I feel like we're moving into. And the realism phase, I think, demands that we hold, especially like if we think of ourselves as a movement, right? Like, what are the components of a healthy movement? Is, and we can touch on Regen brand commons, as just as an example of, like, are we there yet? Or are we just shy of that? Like, is that a good thing for the movement, or do people have different opinions? But the idea that we have, some shared values, that we can hold ourselves accountable, that we're stronger when together than we are apart. And that also we're willing to make some compromises on all of our individual dreams for the sake of, like, pushing a whole forward, right? And that we are in the business of maximizing the highest potential of each of our projects and each of the humans within them, and creating these more elegant designs that nest with each other, so that we can attract the energy and the capital. Like, even all of us going out, scratching and clawing for, a $10,000 on Gitcoin. Thank goodness it exists, compared to like the job of like raising $10 million. It's like, what's the distance? How far are we from some of our organizations to be able to do that and really start to create some like market leadership that allows a big enough like wake behind it in a good way that creates some more conditions so some of these other smaller experimental projects have a place to like breathe, experiment, they have some infrastructure they can work with. So those are like questions that are running through my head right now and thinking about this next phase. And then, I'd say, more broadly, really thinking about just not falling in love with drinking our own Kool-Aid, I guess, too much right now. And I'm in the realism phase, and maybe Sandra's more in the experimental phase still, but if I'm in the realism phase, I want hard lessons from people right now. Somebody, one of our advisors basically said that you have enough users that you are regularly getting complaints. Like that is a sign of success. Like even like Gitcoin, to their credit, they've just built like really one of the only funding platforms. And how many people are bitching and moaning about, using Gitcoin and getting the, being able to get their funds set up and moved in over here and all that, to me, that was like, hindsight, I was one of the complainers. It's like, this should be easier. But you know what? People were trying their damnedest to fund really good projects. And Gitcoin has been constantly iterating and trying to figure out how to design a better quadratic funding system that really speaks to the principles and also the practical, right? The principles of like quadratic funding and, all of our small dollar voices really deserve to be amplified. And the practical of like, how do we make it easier and fast? Where's the liquidity? Like who are our user base? How do we expand it a thing? How do we not water things too far down? Like we need more of like that try and fail and the ability to have like enough like safe haven to fail a little bit without, frankly, all of us and individually just, living paycheck to paycheck, like, oh God, I can't afford to fail there. It's like, we need more spaces to afford to fail that. And part of that is building enough respect in the space to attract capital, to house and ensure that we've got enough of a sandbox to continue to build. And because right now we're living off of, frankly, a bunch of incredible human beings who are working extra jobs, who are scraping by and are mission driven. And that's what I tell people all the time is like, look, the ReFi space, and I, with all due respect to cockroaches, we're a bunch of cockroaches. Like you are not going to get rid of us. We are not going anywhere. We are absolutely dedicated. We're mission driven, values driven. And it doesn't matter hell or high water, which comes at us. We're going to be there no matter what. And that's why we're going to succeed in the end. Now I'm interested, like, how do we speed that up? Like, how do we have a little less pain, a little bit more scalable success so that the other entrepreneurs who are coming behind us have a more ripe, beautiful area to work with that allows for rapid expansion. So I'll stop there, but that's sort of some kind of thoughts off the top of my head.
Amazing. Yeah, I would say I'm like not necessarily, it's still, I toe the lines between idealist and realism. But yeah, I think that one of the things that I see happening is holding ourselves more accountable, those metrics. And I would say maybe we're not cockroaches, maybe we're turtles.
Turtles are endangered.
Well, we're hoping to change that. But also, just the fact that, also mimicking nature, right? I mean, like regeneration is not something that happens overnight. We have to, some seeds, like an avocado tree, takes 7 years to actually bear fruit. So, we do have to give ourselves that patience, but, also with, like you said, creating these foundations, the business foundations, the structures, the collaborations and extensions. I think that like also, having a little bit of like fun and creativity, I think is something that we definitely have also, I think, going for us. The meme wars, you see, people like James McGee, who has been doing some really awesome stuff with liquidity pools and memes for trees, just the energy that somebody like a Jimmy Cohen brings with, funding for planting trees. And I think that, leaning into that creativity, leaning into the storytelling, the artwork, the beauty, the education around the planet. Those are the things that I'm leaning into and sharing, and things like a turtle that goes to the shores of Shankan after 13 years of being at sea to come and lay their eggs where they were hatched, where they were born. So I think stories like that are the things that I think that pull people in. From the infrastructure perspective, I would love to see, there's so many people that want to support us, but that it really is too overwhelming. Crypto, I haven't been able to get my mom, for example, to be onboarded into crypto. I don't think she has any desire. But does she want to help, what we do? Does she want to help fund beach cleanups? Of course. And so being able to provide those other funding avenues for the people that still do love the planet, but, maybe they just don't care. We can't force everybody to, adopt crypto. And so, we have to, also look at the, alternative mechanisms for funding, which are, PayPal or, nonprofit. Right now, we're, applying to work with a nonprofit of the US so we can actually accept US dollars to, provide those tax benefits to donors. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit of all the above. We just have to, be creative, look at the inspiration that we get from others and what we're seeing working in the space, and then be open to, other people that want to help us that aren't necessarily, in our world yet.
I love it. I would call this creative realism, the framework that we should probably incorporate in our operations based on both of your takes. And speaking about, challenges of onboarding your mom or applying to be a nonprofit in the US, back to that point of collaborating with institutions, but also collaborating with the communities. And both of you do a lot of work in those areas. ReFi Tulum, you're very hands on the ground organizing those beach cleanups. Regen Network is also doing an incredible job actually going into the rainforest of Ecuador in Colombia and talking to land stewards rather than, just posting about it on Twitter. So from your experience doing all of that community building, what are some of the realities of doing that kind of work, of collaborating with people on the ground? Can you share maybe some successes and failures of that process? Sandra, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge getting people. There's a lot of curiosity around what is, how do I get paid for, doing great work for the planet? But a lot of people are just motivated to do it. Honestly, the beach cleanups, we really don't need any additional incentive because, where we go is so beautiful and it really is such a spiritual experience to be cleaning these polluted but once pristine beaches. And then yeah, things like the Tulum Crypto Fest, where we had a very active presence. We collaborated with Kingfisher Media and also Unlock Protocol, and we organized some events, also Pizza DAO. And so we brought people we had a It's Raining Tokens event. So we brought people in, but we were able to onboard, 30 people, get 30 people their wallets, send some tokens to them. But, until there's more activity, in like an economic system beyond just the NFT boutique where you can cash in those tokens or, some of the special partners that we have that we've been able to negotiate the use of these tokens for things like a Day Zero festival ticket, until like we can get that, economy expanded, it's going to be a little bit of a road. I think we probably just need to have some stakeholders that are dedicated to those kinds of business development efforts. So yeah, it's going slower than what we would like, but again, still, lots of promising signs of interest. And then, just like the hiccups that you get along the way, like when, one wallet doesn't work for somebody that's from Mexico versus somebody that's from the United States, or what exchange should they use, or, how do they import these funky tokens into their wallets? All of that is just, very tedious steps that you really need to hold people's hands along the way, in addition to like having them understand the basic concepts of cryptocurrency and why and how it could be interesting and important to them and something that could help them, long term for, future wealth generation. So, I think it's not easy work and it's tedious. So, but I think just, continuing to go down the path and finding the tools that do have those interconnections between the blockchains, for example, that's where the knowledge sharing comes in from, all these different DAOs that we participate in and can learn from. So yeah, I think that it's hard. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes people don't give a fuck. Sorry, I don't know if you can swear. And yeah, and then for the people that do, it's that follow through. So yeah, there's still lots of challenges, but little by little, I think that we are starting to build this more traction in the movement.
Maybe picking up, I think my colleague Gregory, he often mentions the speed of trust. And the speed of trust in this space also works slow, right? And when you're speaking with communities in the global south in particular, where arguably, more well-heeled global northerners with capital come in with the latest technology to come save a community or whatever. I mean, I think our community of ReFi is far more advanced as far as our understanding of how that works. but still we're dealing with a legacy of misinformed or just poorly executed ways of engaging communities in the global south, where arguably the most important ecosystems that we all depend on are still intact and under dire threat. So to come into a community, to build a relationship, which is in person, to sit in governance councils, to sit in circle, and to sit, and then let alone start to introduce private keys or introduce, being sitting there waiting, for a transaction to finish or to explain a multi-sig, just the obstacles that we have impressively dealt with as a community of, I think, solutions-oriented humans, engaging other communities that may not have been exposed or as deep in the lingo. Like, I've got nothing but respect for all of us in this space who understand the power of what we're doing, dealing with really clunky, clumsy tools, but just sitting and working with communities to build this this rapport and this trust that as the technology is so rapidly improving and AI is helping out and all these things, it won't replace and it won't speed up the trust processes. And that's in some ways important, right? There's when you shortcut trust, you just create problems downstream that are going to be really impactful. So that, there's just this deep human, what is it to build trust in a community? What does it look and feel like? And then how do we come in behind that trust with solutions that are easy to use, that are contemporary in their application, and that frankly outcompete other things for attention, right? This is an attention economy, no matter where you are, right? Because there's other things that people can click and do and have more rewarding experiences, whether it's psychological, social, or financially. And that's heavy competition for us in Web3, right? We're coming in with meaning and with promises of revenue for verified good work. And people love that concept, but where we end up losing folks is in the application over time, right? Because it all takes time. And we say, just go to my Telegram channel, my Discord. And people are like, okay. And then they go there once and they're like, oh God, this is a hellhole. I don't want to deal with this, or I don't have the time, or I couldn't even log on, or whatever. And so we, I think similarly, I think we inadvertently put up a bunch of obstacles to build that trust and to build long-term rapport. I think to Sandra's point, one of our saving graces, I think we do all generally a good job of convening humans in person, but we're also a global community flying all over the place. And just the time and energy to do that takes time. So there's let's sit and be patient, but let's rapidly iterate. Let's sit and be patient. Let's not forget what trust is built on, the human relationships, being good to your word and delivering on what you say you're going to do. And also be realistic about how fast the technology can move to create an experience that's easeful, joyful, delightful, and materially impactful, right? Because we've got to fulfill a lot of those things. So we're working with a bunch of early adopters, all of us, and they should be getting flowers from us constantly just for putting up with all of us putting up with look, we know this isn't quite perfect yet. We know it's not great, but it's really just trust us and stick with us, right? That's how all movements are built. We have early adopters, and then we can build as the product gets better. So there's a little bit of we're just in that phase of be realistic, choose some really good lanes, try to go, be really good at one thing, and then build out on top of that. Right. And, again, even to Jimmy, I'll respect Jimmy to all of the work that you're doing out there. Jimmy's look, I'm planting mangrove trees. I'm going to stick those little things in the ground and we're going to talk about it over and over again. And then we're going to, the Web3 stuff, how many people are thinking about that in the part of the story? Nobody, for the most part, right? To his little crew here, yes. But the story he's building is around verified impact because you can see a mangrove tree go in the soil, right? And he's working with communities who are excited and his energy is infectious, so we need to keep empowering those ambassadors while we're coming in behind the Jimmys of the world with technology and concepts that really work and that delight at their core. This is a word I want us to think about in the ReFi space. We need to delight our customers. If your customer is not delighted, you need to ask why and get the hard advice and then keep iterating till you delight your customer. This is rule number one in product development. Until they're delighted, you've got things to work on, and don't stop, because that's where we get to really find these things that just all of a sudden we've got that growth, the growth of impact, which we all want to look like this, let alone the business models.
I like that. And also, you know if your customer is delighted or not by engaging with that customer directly. And back to that point of building trust and really talking to these people, right? Sitting in those circles with them rather than just engaging in Telegram groups, right? This is, I think, something that is often forgotten is the technology heavy circles. Like, there's so much emphasis on the tech, and we forget along the way that we are humans, and the way people build trust between humans is not necessarily through blockchain, right? Is through knowing you as a person, having track record, being understanding of the needs and having the compassion and not coming with those imposed solutions. So I'm definitely a big proponent of doing the work by engaging these communities and doing some of that capacity building that's very much needed. And kind of going off of that doing rather than talking. Dave, I really wanted to touch on this. And Sandra, I'm curious if you followed the recent development. I personally did not go to ETH Denver, but followed the recent sort of regen drama or development, call it what it is. The fact that the conference was themed around regeneration, the year of regenerates, but there wasn't much of programming dedicated to kind of the regen refi space. And then Gregory from Regen Network suggested creating the Regen Commons, right? This decentralized IP model, the Regen Commons, which is a decentralized brand commons that is needed to avoid regen washing. So my question is, do we need more of that kind of theoretical discussion about what it means to be regen over doing the important work of like going into the communities? Like, is that something we should focus on? Can you maybe provide the rationale for like why we need to dedicate all the energy towards creating the Regen Commons as a concept?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to give an update there. So yes, I think, there's obviously history here where I think the Regen Network team, which I've been a part of, has been from day one trying to build a technological commons. So it's been part of the vision. And to be fair, this, little bit of the spark that really allowed the full bloom of the conversation happen because ETH Denver chose Year of the Regenerates and had zero programming around what we would consider regeneration. And so that kind of sparked more of the defensive position, right? Which is, hey, you're saying regen and regenerate. We've been building, everyone in this space that's listening here, a long time and working our butts off. And to have, some actor come in and not like even pay lip service, essentially, at least at the beginning, to programming in what does it look like to, go from a degen to a regen, to really imbue our interactions with ecological health with, was a little bit offensive, and in some ways like was a reminder that all this stuff that we're building could be co-opted by larger actors who are more well-heeled. And this isn't to put ETH Denver on the spot because frankly, they, I think, reacted pretty well. But it was because we acted as a group in some ways, like the actors in the space came together and said, hey, we think actually there's a better way to do this. Here's what regeneration means to us. This is what this could look like. And ETH Denver organizers and the sport, to their credit, acted immediately. Again, it was with some friendly cajoling on Twitter and whatnot, or on X. But it was the idea that we all pulled together and we all had a common voice around a set of values, which allowed us to be much bigger than we were. And I think that's the common theme of what the Regen Brand Commons is aiming to do. But let's assume the goal is to be less defensive and more on the side of like, what can we do together to secure more resources, to create some basic principles and guidelines to support all of the regen projects coming in, to give them a support structure and some infrastructure at the brand level with shared IP, or all the way to like, does Regen brand become top of funnel for resources and speaking to even larger groups of people in larger industries around what regeneration looks like and how it can show up. And I think it's like, to me, I'd like want to keep us focused personally on, and why I'm excited about it is what's possible for securing more resources and being better at organizing a bunch of smaller actors toward a shared goal versus like policing, Maya, if you had a neat, cool project and you're like, do I need to like pay a toll, to come to be a regen, I'm doing good work. It's, ecological repair. Like what level of oversight do I really need? That's a valid question. And if that's what the Regen Brand Commons ended up being, it's probably a waste of time. If it's more of like, hey, let's organize ourselves and make sure that your project has immediate access to a network of actors that have been through, hell and back, that they have established some shared goals and objectives, that we have IP that is off the shelf ready for you to use to scale your business and to, connect you to a community that wants to see you succeed, and that we have just a little bit more formal infrastructure and organizing, that's exciting to me. And and again, maybe we become oblivious as we grow and scale. But I'd love to have that problem. I think right now, frankly, I think what we're doing isn't working great. And it's because, we're still pretty disparate. I think ReFi DAO is tried so hard and has done incredible work at providing some common threads for us to stick together. So kudos to you, Teresa, and others folks who have been kind of continuing to hold the torch. And what does it look like is there another step for us to like grow up as a movement? Is Regen Brand Commons maybe just something to think about, and maybe it spurs some other ideas? But that conversation is going to tell us a lot about who we are, like who we are now, what we're ready for, and where we think we could go next. So I think the part that we should consider, keep moving, is what does the dialogue look like? What are the kind of existential questions, like as we step back and look at our movement as a Regen community? Can the Regen Brand Commons really be additive to that? Or is it a distraction? Is it bureaucracy? If it's a distraction, bureaucracy, and we all collectively agree with that, let's just keep moving, right? And keep growing and building. But I'm not under any assumption that what we're doing now, the way things are going, is going to accelerate us probably at the speed that we want to. Is this the right disruption? I think that's a fair conversation, but let's have it. Let's have the conversation, I guess, in an organized fashion with professional support to really like harness the intellectual prowess of this group to really think through like where can we coordinate and at what level is really the conversation to have. That's my opinion.
Is the vision for the Regen Brand Commons to actually have like potentially a certification where there's an approved Regen Brand Commons, and like maybe it's a Regen Brand Commons stamp of approval or some kind of stamp that would be provided to groups that, met a certain adherence of?
I think that's TBD. I think there's, certainly, where we see the Regen word being, if you will, like obviously abused or greenwash, like there's nice to have, private function, a trademark that the brand would govern in order to protect the basic sanctity of verified ecological or regeneration, and what that means at the very lowest common denominator. At the higher levels of, can we turn the Regen brand into a trust mark, essentially? I think that's like, throw that to the group. And, I don't think we should rush into like any overly expansive idea that we don't have the capacity or attention span to hold. It's like, is there a basic next leveling up as a movement for us? Is the Regen Brand Commons one of many vehicles in order to do that? Just like where I think ReFi DAO, frankly, stepped us up a whole level, a few years ago when it came to be of really cohering a lot of the voices. What's the next step above that? The Brand Commons, it could be, some other essentially DAO that is, representative of multiple actors in the space that are really shipping product and, learning and want to share those resources with a community of actors who have a similar vision. Like I think those are all great questions to ask and answer together.
Sandra, I'm actually curious to hear your take and your maybe a quick reaction to this as we wrap up. And I specifically am curious about your reaction to one of the comments to Gregory's post about, establishing Regen Commons by the founder of Regens Unite, who said, and I quote, "There's no such thing as a Regen brand that could be owned by anyone or any organization, yet alone licensed. Anyone should be able to use the word Regen as they please in the same way that anyone can use the word degen. Who are we as a community to already start setting boundaries and licensing conditions before we have even made a dent in the regeneration of our planet?"
Wow. Yeah. I mean, a lot of truth to that. Who are we? Who are we? But I don't think that what I understand the Regen Brand Commons, and I don't have that much information. I wasn't at ETH Denver, but I did follow a little bit of what was happening. To me, I feel like it's a guideline, right? It's not necessarily something that there's going to be somebody cracking the whip or the police coming after you for misusing the word regen. But if there's a certain, a caliber or a certain level of standards that we want to go with the word regen, then we can establish those. It's not any, people don't have to follow it, right? Nobody needs, we do live in a decentralized world, and, all these nodes are acting independently, especially, within the ReFi DAO network, but, and we're all pursuing, what makes sense at the local level. So and yeah, who am I to say, you can't, that's not your word, but at the same time, if there's a standard and, enough of us adopt that and say, yeah, this is what it means to be regen, at least for us, at least for me, at least within this community. And this is something that we would like other people that are using this word to aspire to, without necessarily the police activity. I think that there's not a problem with that, and it's about having, these shared definitions for, where we're moving. And if we don't start at the same place now, how can we expect other people to understand what that place is, or, how to join us or how to grow from there? So I think that there's a lot of value in establishing those standards, maybe again, without the, the hard consequences of misuse that, at least, within the people that want to elevate the standard and want to, I guess, differentiate and separate themselves. There is a lot of greenwashing. There is a lot of co-opting of these terms. We've seen it happening, across all of these major, climate conferences, and, that don't have anything regenerative happening there. Or, we've got Coca-Cola as a sponsor. But, again, like, we have to be a little bit open. If Coca-Cola, sees that they're a part of the problem, they want to give funds and support regenerative activities across the planet, then there's a lot of individuals in those companies that do care about the planet and understand the impact or want to make good on what, the negative impact has been. So I think we have to give all of those people an opportunity to learn, aspire to be a regen, and hopefully get to the level where, maybe some more mature organizations are at.
Thank you for sharing your perspective. We will have to end it on this. And I'm actually curious to leave it up to the community. What do you all think about the Regen comments? Leave a comment, ask a question. This is definitely just scratching the surface of all these possible conversations that are to be had in the future. I'm curious to follow along. And as we wrap up this episode, we always end with rapid fire questions. And since it's a special episode, these are the different rapid fire questions than we usually do, except for one. Are you ready?
Ready.
So the first question is, what is your life mantra or quote that has shaped you as a person? Dave.
Attitude is everything.
And you, Sandra?
A closed mouth never gets fed.
I like it. And what's one accomplishment you're most proud of? Sandra, you go first.
Most recently, I'm most proud of the artists that we have brought into the Museum of Contemporary Art in Quintana Roo, the MAC Museum, and being able to onboard many of these female artists from the Fierce Feminine of ReFi Collective and having their artwork now shown in a national museum here in Mexico. So that's something I'm very proud of.
Awesome.
Mine raising 2 daughters who are now in their late teens and still love me.
That's a great accomplishment. That's massive. And the final question, what does it mean to be a regen for you? Dave, you go first.
Integrating ecological health into every interaction.
Beautiful. Sandra?
I think it's starting with self-regeneration and starting with what I can do around my community. Where can I personally have impact with these hands, with this voice? And, where can I share the regenerative values to my community?
Beautiful. What a wonderful note to conclude on. Thank you both for coming on to this special edition of the ReFi podcast, for sharing your perspectives. I really like this kind of combination of experimentation and realism. And as we conclude, is there anything else you want to end on? Any calls to action for the community? Any final words of wisdom?
Keep shipping, people. Ship, ship, ship. Don't stop. Don't let anyone tell you shouldn't be. Ship it, and don't wait for perfect. Keep shipping.
I love that. I do actually have a call to action, and I'm going to lobby both of you into this action. It goes back to our dear friend Jimmy, who has started the Cold Bowl Challenge. So I'm challenging both of you to do this. Is to raise awareness to plant 1 billion trees for World Environment Day. And so if you'll give me a moment, I'm just going to get my bowl with ice cubes. And I'm challenging you both, Dave Fortson and Maya Dentzel, and also Samu from Gaia Agent, to join this challenge with me. All right, here we go. You're supposed to do this, I think, in the morning time to just get refreshed. Okay, ready? I did it.
Bravo. And that's a wrap for this special episode of ReFi Podcast. Thank you. Let us know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate you. All right. Bye-bye.